Hi, I'm so excited that y'all accepted this call to have this conversation today for the Episcopal Church Foundation. I know all of y'all are super busy, starting with Matt. Oh my gosh, you have kind of like a new role, right? I hear in your life.
You got a new job, right? Yeah.
Tiny new role. And then we have Miguel, who is joining us from España. Oh my goodness. And then we have Stephen, who is going on vacation tomorrow. So all of y'all are just, and all of us, I think, are in this transition of life and of, commitments and all of that. So as we're talking about, like I was telling y'all earlier, I want us to talk a little bit about the credit union in New York, in the Diocese of New York. And so I want to start with the question of why. Why credit union and why?
Well, this has long been a dream of folks in the Diocese of New York, and I have to begin by saying it began as a dream from Winnie Varghese, who carried it for a very long time, and then Bishop Jennifer Redall and Matt Oprendeck have really made sure we can have this chartered here in New York. And so grateful, always, great cloud of witnesses involved in this work. But the dream has been that we can use our resources for justice. There's a challenge across New York and really every part of the Diocese of New York for our folks who are unbanked and who are experiencing our economic systems in oppressive ways. And we think the church can make a difference in that. We can all make a difference in that. We can all join to it. And that's where the credit union started.
I think just to take off on what Bishop Hyde has said here, just knowing that there are so many populations, and particularly immigrant and refugee communities, who are unbanked and who not have access to accounts or do not have accounts, and so live paycheck to paycheck, literally going to cash that, and therefore not being able to have access to kind of even basic loans at moments of crisis, or to make basic investments, such as for a car or for these very simple things that a lot of us just take for granted. I think part of the dream that, as Bishop Hyde said, people like Winnie Varghese and so many others, particularly I believe in the West Harlem area, have really carried forward, is that we have the network and the ability to make that accessible to people who otherwise would be prevented from. And that's credit unions are a great tool for doing that.
And I would add to what my two distinguished colleagues have just said. What I didn't really realize is how much more literally expensive it is to be poor. So that oddly, when you don't have money, actually things will cost more. And so, for example, for groceries, a lot of people, if you live in the suburbs or you can afford it, it's much cheaper to buy in bulk. But if you don't have a big store nearby to buy in bulk, you'll have to pay more when you go to the local bodega to buy a little loaf of bread rather than buying lots of bread at once. And if you could somehow find a big store in the city, how do you bring it all back on the subway? You can't. So like that's one example. Or ATM machines, where if you're using an ATM that's not your bank and you can only take out $20, then you're charged, $3 or $4. That's a high percentage versus if you could take out $500 at once, that's a much lower percentage. So in so many different ways, it actually just literally costs more to be poor. And one way the credit union can help that is by providing banking services to people who don't have banking services at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, when I heard about it, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, no, go ahead, Dr. Montes.
Well, what I was going to say is, when I heard about this opportunity and, when I was invited to come in, that was one of the biggest things for me, because I know as a Latina also, and so many people don't have bank accounts, but yet have credit cards. That is huge to me. So what were we going to say, Bishop?
Oh, just part of our gospel call to dismantle white supremacy. What you just described is exactly what's happening in communities across New York. And for us in New York, the credit union is part of a big commitment to reparations from slavery, and its aftermath, economic justice through the credit union, but also creation care and greening our buildings. Racial, economic, environmental justice all go together for how we live our faith and how we shift our institution forward at this moment for exactly the reasons you just described. On the ground, this is the way in which we can be church together. And Kelly Brown Douglas has talked about this being the time for the church to be church. This is one way that we're going to be church together, is the credit union.
Yes, wow. Miguel, were you going to say something? You're going to add?
Not really. I was just going to say, I think even in this moment in which the Episcopal Church is wrestling with its legacy as well as its assets, how we think about our assets is really, really important. And I think having understanding that we actually do have a lot of resources that we can make available for folks who are struggling, and recognize that that's part of the call is really important. And I would also, it's part of the gospel, and it also goes back to our even more ancient traditions. There's when you go to Eldridge Street Synagogue on the Lower East Side, there's a really beautiful kind of display window. And on it, there are these cards that show like people at the synagogue from the like 1920s giving free loans to members of the synagogue for like $20. And then, $20 has been paid back, 0 interest. This tradition of giving loans to one another at very low or 0 interest, first of all, it's in the gospel. But secondly, it really, really goes to the very depths of our traditions and who we are. And so this is simply another way of living that out. And really, again, want to just commend that. I think this is remarkable in that it's very modern. We're literally doing banking, but also extremely ancient way of approaching these things, because economic justice is part of the call here.
Yeah, and you talk about that in your book, Miguel, and which I feel, if y'all don't have it, please go get it anywhere. It's called The Unjust Steward. And not only is it beautifully written, but it is so, even like as you're saying it's very modern, and at the same time it is just rooted in tradition and in ancient our faith, right? In our traditional, in our faith tradition. And so I thank you so much for writing that. And so I'm going to just go a little bit towards that. Tell me a little bit, because I know that you started, I remember you posting about, what you were reading about, your research. How did you start with that passion, to think about money and a different way of looking at it?
Well, I worked for the Episcopal Church Foundation for 7 years, right? And the Episcopal Church Foundation is a place that certainly talks and thinks a lot about financial stewardship. And I think it's just a very important thing that we have a level of depth in our theology about how we think about money, about this tool that is part of our personal lives, but is also so much part of our institutional lives. My favorite definition that came from this research was from Basil of Caesarea in the 4th century, in which he describes money as medicine to alleviate suffering. But it's very powerful medicine, and in fact, it's very addictive medicine. And so he acknowledges that there's this kind of dual-sided nature. It can do a great deal of good, such as a credit union, to alleviate suffering in the world. And yet, for those of us who are in institutions of power and wealth, we have to watch ourselves, because it's an addictive substance. And we have to be really thoughtful about the way in which our culture is addicted, in which we might be addicted, and in which and what does freedom from addiction to this substance look like as well. So I think A, money is always interesting. B, the foundation, the Episcopal Church Foundation, is a place that really has tried to provide some financial resources. And if I can be a little bit critical of it, while I was there, I found the theology to be a bit lacking at times in terms of biblical theology and depth around money. And so I wanted to spend some time doing the research for myself, really, about what does tradition and what does our faith have to say about this substance that is such a critical part of our lives and our society.
Thank you. And this reminds me a little bit of, some conversations that I've had with you, Stephen, about tradition. And we really haven't talked that much about money, but we have talked about, how it just looks different in different traditions. So could you talk just a little bit about that, about your view of the world with your traditions and about money?
Well, when I was growing up, my parents, knew relatives of mine would own, they own small businesses. They own like a grocery store, a laundromat. And one way that they finance those businesses is there was this thing it's in Korean called gae. And what would happen is every month, a group of people would get together. And I think it's a lot of cultures, older cultures have this, but everyone would put in like a certain amount of money in the pot. And then once every few months or a year, depending on how many people are in that group, that would be you would get all of it. So essentially, it was a way for this group of people, often connected by the church or blood relations, or they knew each other, so they could trust it, right? Because you can't do that system if you don't trust that after you get yours, you don't give back into it. And so it's really sort of a system of mutual aid. And I realized that for Korean immigrants who came to this country, don't have a credit history, can't speak the language, but want to start a business, this was their banking system. This was it. And so this is essentially a way to give each other a sort of a free loan. And so I think what we're doing here with the credit union has deep roots, both in the Christian tradition, but also just like in just traditional cultures, just large extended families, how they would support one another. And I think it's important to note that this is not really charity. So charity has its place, but that also can be a little bit, you don't really preserve someone's dignity if you're giving them sort of a handout. And here, these are people running successful businesses. I mean, it's just that the banks, because they had a particular application process, or there are all these barriers, invisible and visible, they didn't see these businesses, and it wasn't worth it to give money to them. So part of what we're going to try to do when we give money to people, lend them, is we expect them to get paid back. And so, but we expect we can, because these are businesses that will want to support and that they can support paying back a loan. So it's not, there'll be times when we'll make unsecured loans to people and they can't pay it back, and that's fine, that happens. But the model is that it's mutual aid, that I give you my money that I'm investing, you're going to invest it to someone else's business, they'll pay it back, and then we can just keep handing it around to each other like that.
Yeah, wow. I think we call it like tanda or something like that in Spanish, because I've heard that before too. So Bishop Matt, I would love to ask you what your hope is for all this. And I know that you have spoken to all of us and to many more people, but what is the hope? What is your hope for this?
Well, my hope for this is it changes who we are as church and changes our communities around the churches. One of the aspects of the charter for this credit union is anyone can join. Folks who are with us on Sunday mornings, people who are with us in our programs, people in the neighborhoods around our parishes. And so, Diocese of New York has congregations in urban, rural, and suburban areas. And so we have the chance to really make a difference across wider New York. And I think that's a wonderful way for us to live who we are and what we value, and to express our faith. And so that's the excitement, that will be different. The landscape will be different. The kinds of questions that we've raised that are right now true in terms of people being unbanked and credit cards and other things, we can change that and change it through this.
Miguel, what would be your hope for all of this?
I think this goes to partly what Stephen described. I think it's, for me, about making seeing the impact on the lives of people who are struggling. You know, people are evicted for lack of $100, right? And there's oftentimes there's no bank for people to turn to in those moments. And part of the gospel mandate, you know, Jesus says, you know, lend to one another without interest, basically. Actually, and I think he's speaking about moments like that. Communities, religious communities in particular, who know one another and have trust with one another and can have this heart of compassion, you know, extending $100 to someone who's facing an eviction notice is a concrete act of care, and it will have direct impact on the lives of, you know, not just the person who's about to be evicted, but the kids, etc. And so this is a huge thing to have become accessible for folks. And I think that, you know, a story like that is just one of many. So that's a negative story, you know, or positive one would be exactly the story of someone being able to get a loan to start a business. You know, these things are so small, and yet at the right moment, and under kind of the generous terms that I think the church would want to offer, they really can make just a huge impact on people's lives. And I think that's long term, that's my hope. You know, the story of the credit union in LA during the time of COVID is really critical to think about. They offered low interest loans to churches who were really facing a tough time during the pandemic. And, you know, that became a buffer, a huge buffer for folks in the LA diocese. So again, just in moments of crises, things like this are just such an important tool.
Yeah, Stephen, what about you? What is your hope?
So I'll start by answering this way. I used to do immigration advocacy in a different context, and there was this one church in Long Island where the pastor wanted us to come out and do some immigration work. And when I talked to their church council, you know, one of them talked about, oh, these illegals and, you know, that kind of language. And after we started an immigration clinic there, where the people in the church would actually meet immigrants and help them with their citizenship application process, that transformed the church itself. So it was both providing the service, so the people receiving the services were changed, of course, but the church itself, like suddenly it was not some abstract illegal people over here. It was like, oh, that's that person over there I got to talk to, and I you know, right in front of me. And so in the same way that Miguel said, money is this thing that, you know, is really this power in our lives. I think when we start sharing our money with people, I think that can build a kind of connection. So my hope is that this allows us to build a sort of a different kind of connection between the people inside the church, maybe and the people outside the church. And in that way, we can maybe break down that barrier. And so maybe we can see ourselves outside more. Maybe some of them can see themselves inside too.
Yeah, and I think all of y'all have mentioned how there's a big difference, you know, when you are like asking somebody for help, right? Like, can you lend me $10? Can you lend me $20? But, you know, your integrity is intact when you also, and your wholeness is intact when you go to a bank, right? When you go to like this credit union and ask for a loan, not like you're saying, you know, not like a handout. And I think that is very important for people, for our wholeness, to be able to still be, you know, with our head held up high, knowing that we're doing something, you know, to help ourselves too, right? So I thank y'all so much for this time, and thank you so much for all the work that all of y'all have been doing. And yeah, it's just, it's such a wonderful thing to know that there's people like y'all, you know, in different parts of the world now, and that we can come together with this. So thank y'all so much for your time. Very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for talking to us about this.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye.